Good morning, America. How are ya? Monday Morning Radio. Hi, I'm Denny Jelsma, and I'm at the world-famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida. Today is Monday, and you know what we do on Monday? You guessed it, we do show and tell. Show and tell is always brought to you by Jelsma Graphics, the people that make all the embroidered railroad clothing, just like my shirt here, from t-shirts, jackets, club shirts. When you need anything embroidered, go to Jelsma.com. That's Jelsma, Jelsma.com. And with all that being said, show and tell is going to start right now. It's Monday morning show and tell, and we have an exciting show, and we're going to be talking today about big steam engines from the East Coast all the way to the Pacific. And I want to start out right away saying I am not a steam person. I used to say I didn't like steam. I do like steam. It's very enchanting to look at a steam engine run, but I'm just not, that really doesn't blow my skirt up. But with that being said, I've got a lot of steam engines, so some people will say, gee, I guess you do like steam. And so I'm not going to really get into a lot of the technical stuff because I just don't know. And so we're going to start out with big steam. You know, the railroads needed to pull these freight trains over a lot of different grades and in different areas of the United States. One of the biggest obstacles they had in the East from getting stuff from the East Coast to the Midwest and to the West was the Allegheny Mountains. And that Alleghenies, you look at a map, it went from Maine all the way down into Alabama. And so they needed some really big power. And then they needed to go around the curves. They found out they made these bigger engines, and the engines were so big that they would tear up the rails. And so there was a Frenchman that came up with a idea of making an articulate. So the wheels could turn back and forth and go around the rails. And so the steam engine really revolved, and they really started with a lot of the big steam engines back in the just before World War II. Well, actually World War I in 1916, 17s, and even right at the turn of the century they had some really big steam engines. And so even in the Southeast, the seaboard had an articulate engine, and it looked a lot like our B&O engine that we have here, and it ran from Atlanta to Birmingham because that was kind of some rough terrain. And so let's get started. I'm going to go over a lot of these engines, and once again, I am not a steam. I just want to just show you what the railroads had. And so when you want to model, there's just really a variety of big steam engines, and I like anything big. I'm a diesel guy, and I love these big turbines and the big engines, especially the Union Pacific and SP had. So let's get started. Well, my first engine I have here is the B&O. And number two, you are an expert on this B&O. So you was telling me.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but there are really two kinds of articulated locomotives. There are engines that are called single expansion, which this is, in which both sets of cylinders are fed high pressure steam directly from the boiler. These engines tend to be the faster ones, and the cylinders would be the same size.
Okay, so and the B&O had these, and this was their savior to pulling it over the Allegheny Mountains. Real quickly, I want you to span to this here. This here was thousands of horsepower, and this little diesel here we have here was like 500, and maybe depending upon the model, what I understand, 560 or 600 horsepower. So you kind of go from this to this big giant. and so giant of the rails is what we're calling this here. Now the next engine is the Pennsy. I really like the Pennsy, and this was the Q2, and this was a kind of an experimental engine. And Q2 people, they say that this was just as powerful as the big boy. So do you have any comments on the Pennsy Q2 number 2?
Well, it's a steam turbine.
That's correct.
Engine, and it had actually 2 turbines in it, a main for forward and a small turbine for reverse. Yes, it was very powerful, but it was never repeated. They could never solve the problem of the fly ash attacking the turbine blades. So it became it was a high maintenance engine because of that problem.
And they tried to, they did some different size of boilers, if I was reading right. But anyhow, listeners, if you want to defend the Q2 from the big boy, you're welcome. Our next engine is the N&W Y. Now, I asked number 2 and also Rodney, I said, hey, what's the difference between a N&W A and a Y? And I say there's a lot of alphabets in between. And so, Greg?
Well, now, remember when we talked about the B&O, we said that was a single expansion locomotive. A true Malay is double expansion. And what that means is that the rear cylinders are fed directly from the boiler with high speed or with high pressure steam. The front cylinders are fed the exhaust steam from the back cylinders, so the steam is used twice.
Okay.
Which is why it's called a double expansion.
Now, I understand that the A's could run up to 60 miles an hour, and then the Y's were about, the best operating speed was around 25. They were designed to haul 150 car coal drags out of the Appalachia, West Virginia mines, all the way to Norfolk, Virginia, to the docks. Okay, we're going to move on down, and our next engine we have is it's a real favorite of mine, and it's called the Yellowstone. And it's the model that I have here is the Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range, and it was designed to haul 200 car ore cars. And now these were iron pellets, you know, and I often wondered why was these cars were so short when they had the pulling the iron pellets. Well, because there was iron and it was so heavy. But anyhow, the Yellowstone was an engine made by Alco, and it was just a little smaller than the big boy. It was a wheel arrangement, and once again, for the person that's just getting started in a model railroading, in steam, they had wheel arrangements. And so this was a 2 because you got 1, 2 on each side, 4, 4, 4. Now this had a very heavy tender because they hold a lot of coal, and so to make it easier on the rails, they designed it. It had a lot of extra wheels, kind of like, you know, like, and they called these kind of like, I think it was one of Greg, like the centipede type.
This was considered a centipede tender.
And so the Yellowstone, a lot of the Northern Pacific had a bunch of Yellowstones, and they were very successful. And but I liked this particular engine. And once again, the technical, I don't know. I love the size of it. Now, we're kind of, I'm going to go, I brought this in just to kind of show that this was an engine that was kind of the first to use the Tipton bearings. And they used this as a display, the Tipton Bearing Company, and it was lettered Tipton bearings, and then they had the green briar, but it's just a very colorful engine. and it was a very powerful 4 engine, and they called the Greenbrier class. Now, down in the Texas southwest area, they had some grades, but they had some real long freight. And so the Texas Pacific came up with what they called the Texas class, and the Santa Fe had the Texas class, and they had what was a 210-2. And there was a heavy steam engine that could haul big trains, heavy trains, but it wasn't over that many grades. It was very successful. The Santa Fe, Missouri Pacific, and the Texas Pacific was really famous for this. Now, this particular engine, I know I'll get a lot of comments. This is a fantasy scheme that Broadway came out. I just love the engine. This particular engine in real life was not in that color scheme. I liked it, and that's why I got it. Now, when you think of big steam, what do you think of? You think of the Union Pacific, and I got 3 versions of the big steam that I want to show you guys and gals. The first one is the Challenger. You know, the Challenger came out in the late 20s, ran on the Union Pacific through the Depression and through the 30s, and they ran all the way actually into the 50s. And the Challenger was a 4-6-6-4, and then had the heavy tender, and we call the centipede if you want. And this really, when it came to excursion, they saved the 3985. Today, the Union Pacific has got it in the shop in Illinois to be rebuilt. And they just wore it out. When you thought of big steams, you thought of the Challenger. And Union Pacific ran this train for probably 30 years in excursion service in the 70s and 80s and in the 90s. And then they finally had to have the boiler redone, and it's now in Silvis, Illinois, in the Davenport, Iowa area on the river, and the old Rock Island shops, and they're reconditioning this engine. And it was just, I rode behind this engine, and it was just a gorgeous engine. Then Union Pacific decided to restore the biggest steam engine that was ever made in North America, and that was the Big Boy. And they had 25 of them, and what I have here is 4014, which is in the excursion. It was in Southern California on display, and hundreds and thousands of us have watched this thing being restored. They took 4 or 5 years, and it's just really, really interesting. And so it is a 4848. Absolute gorgeous engine. There's a lot of upgrades that they put on this engine versus the Challenger, and I'm not technically knowledgeable to tell you that. And then I brought another workhorse that UP had, because UP had heavy grades, and they had to get these engines over the mountains. And this was a 212-2, and this was a heavy steam engine. I think this first appeared, I could be wrong on some of the dates, but like in the early 1912, 13, 14, and they just kept improving this engine, and you saw the 9000s run all the way up into the 50s. And so Union Pacific was just historically known for its heavy steam engines and power, and they were a railroad that would experiment with just about anything. The two railroads that would experiment with about anything was the Pennsylvania and the Union Pacific. They both had just unbelievable type of power. Then we have our next I want to show you is the Southern Pacific cab forward. And you say, what do you mean cab forward? Well, they ran the literally backwards, and they put the cab up front here, which was unheard of in the steam days. And so they did that because they had long tunnels throughout the Cascades and the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges of the West, and heavy grades, long tunnels, heavy snow sheds. And so they came up with the cab forward. They did this in the early teens all the way up into the war years. And this here is they call a cab forward number four, C4, and they had different numbers that went all. The one that's in the California Museum, which is probably the best rendition of a cab forward, is a C12, I believe. I could be wrong. And so just heavy steam. Now these engines some are brass, some are most of them are Broadway limited. I had a Bachmann, but they smoke, they have sound, make all kinds of great noise, and it's just a joy to look at that. Now, once again, I'm not a steam guy, but I do like some of my steams. I'm going to do a video on, I call the glamour girls of the steam. And you know, the Seaboard even had a glamour girl. They had a steam engine that ran from Wildwood to the Tampa area, and they put a nice shroud on it, and it was in the Citra scheme. And I just love that engine. I'd love to have a model of that. But I'm going to be doing that video on what I call the glamour girls, and so I'll have a bunch of those. And I just, to end the video, these engines typically you couldn't compare horsepower. You never. It was so many pounds of traction that they would rate these engines. But if you kind of compared them with the diesel, and that's like apples and oranges, really. A lot of these, the big boy, some claim could have up to 6,000 horsepower or 7,000. Typically, the cab forwards maybe 4 to 5, depending upon. But I just want to show you how much mechanical mechanism that they had to pull freight. And then today, the modern diesel. Here we have an SD90, and that was 6,000 horsepower, and with a crew of 2. And so that's kind of the way it is at our show and tell, showing you the giants of the rails. And we're in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where the sun always shines, and running trains is an absolute pleasure.